Welcome back to another episode of Pack Therapy. I'm your host, Joe Giglio, joined by Wolfpack great Scott Wood. And Scott, I purposely wore stripes today, but I wore them horizontal because I didn't want to confuse you. But we are going to have a conversation about officiating on this week's episode, and I want you to rely on your experience and your expertise and the different situations that you were put in during your very eventful NC State career and share your wisdom and share some of your thoughts. Let's see if we can't have a rational and very helpful conversation about officiating. Let's see if that's possible. Let's see if we can do that.
Probably won't be possible,
Okay.
but kind of just quick take. I don't know if there's necessarily an official out there that I liked, and typically, if you know an official by name, they're usually not a great official. That's always been my take. To kind of go with that, I've always been taught that all officials are bad, so you just got to expect the worst out of them.
Okay.
But I've also learned over my career that officiating is hands down one of the hardest jobs there are, especially in basketball. High paced, um, everything's kind of an opinion. So it's very tough. But I think in this particular instance, you're probably getting more towards the Carolina game officiating. Um,
Well, obviously, this is Pack Therapy, and we're talking about NC State's experience against North Carolina. But I feel like now the only way to actually have a rational conversation about any of this stuff is to kind of expand it and include all of the things we've seen going back to the Carolina game. You had the Duke Virginia Tech incident, then you had the Syracuse Carolina incident. And I just think we've lost a little bit of our sight of the very first thing that you said after there are no good officials is it's a really hard job. And I think it's being complicated by not just replay, but the way that replay is used. So I would push back on you in the sense that there are no good officials. Well, I mean, if 1,000 people participate in something, 20 of them are going to be good at it at minimum. And that's who you see at the Final Four. That's the group that you see in the NCAA tournament. They're the best of it. So to me, let's use the Carolina Syracuse game as an example from Tuesday night. All right, the call at the end of the game, Judah Mintz drives to the basket. RJ Davis is playing defense. They call an offensive foul in real time on Mintz. Roger
yeah,
Ayers, an official who you're familiar with from your time at NC State and the games that he worked. I thought, and I think is one of the best officials in the league. I thought he got the call right in real time. And then all of a sudden, we got to go to like this 20-minute review where we decide, oh, there's flagrant fouls and there's levels to it, and then we got to add free throws. And I just thought it was a foul correctly called by the human being, and then we have a review, and it becomes a whole other production.
yeah.
That's my issue. Well, I mean, free throw discrepancy, we could talk a little bit more about that. That's fine, but I feel like the real problems are at the end of games, and we see these fouls, the contact fouls. Leaky Black and Terquavion Smith was a contact play too that was reviewed, and I didn't think Leaky Black should have been ejected from that game. But again, it was a foul on Leaky Black. But why did we have to go back and review everything as if it's the end of the world? That's the part I'm getting at with my frustration with the officiating mechanism, not the officials themselves.
Yeah, and that's where like the Leaky Black situation, I think maybe should just be, you know, the official's perspective and the takeaway right then and there. Now, I do think there are some instances that maybe recall, a groin punch, which NC State's notorious with, and some
Sure.
little that maybe need, we got to take a look under the hood.
That's
Um,
a great example because you know why, Scott? That wasn't even called in real time. So to me, but that was a malicious non-basketball act. Those are the things, in my opinion, which should be reviewed. End plays, out of bounds, inbounds, out of bounds, clock issues, and malicious, violent acts that are not part of the game. If somebody throws a punch, should be reviewed. But the idea of going back and looking at a block charge and deciding, well, there was contact to his face, and now all of a sudden it becomes, again, you want use either one example that you want to use. I'm trying to take team names out of this and really just kind of concentrate on the actual basketball play. So to me, that's the issue. That's the primary issue. And it's funny you mentioned Wake Forest won that game in part because it wasn't called. And Paul, there wasn't even a foul on the play, Scott. I'll give you one guess who the official was. I will give you one guess who the official was.
I mean, Carl?
It was Carl Hess. Yes.
I mean, I 100% agree with you, but I do think there are times where it's useful, and I do think there are times, especially in game, where and here's the hard part of me saying this is that it should be used at the end game, games on the line. I don't know if it's necessarily useful for the out of bound touches where it's a close call and some things like that, but I'm also a firm believer that if that one change at the end isn't make or break your game. There's calls throughout the game that are going to make a difference too. So it's hard for me to sit here and say, let's just do it at the end. But in all reality, there's probably plays throughout the game that if they really took a look at it, there could be a correction. So I don't know. It's kind of a catch-22. I do think there's times at the end of the games where it is necessary that they got to get a right call. But again, I don't know if that at the moment, it has a direct impact on the game, but there's calls throughout the game that you could go back and say, oh, we lost by 1 point. If this would have been reviewed, now all of a sudden, we get another possession. So it's kind of a catch-22 there.
You've been to just about every NC State home game this year. Louisville was the first ACC game that I went to, and I thought that day, I think there's a league initiative to let the teams play this season. Have you noticed a more laissez-faire approach from the officials during the games in ACC play in particular?
Yes,
a willingness to let the teams play is what I'm getting at.
And so that's why I told you I didn't want to talk officials because that's feel like that's all that people have come up to me about is the officiating. And here is my one gripe if we were going to gripe about officiating, and that one game that everybody wants to talk about in particular is probably the first 8 minutes. I'd have to go back and get the exact timing. The first 8 minutes, they absolutely let them play like football players. It was physical. It was aggressive. They weren't calling those touch fouls. And then it's just like a switch. The calling was a little different towards, the 8 minute end mark. They were letting them play, and now all of a sudden they changed it up. They started calling a couple more touchy fouls. And yes, as a team, you have to adjust to officiating. It comes with the territory, but it's as a player that's very hard to turn off and turn on. And I feel like all of a sudden, Carolina started being the aggressor, and State wasn't getting to the rim as much. They weren't being as aggressive. They were taking a couple more pull-ups. And again, the hard part for people to realize is these are human beings calling these calls. And 9 out of 10 times, people don't want to hear it. The aggressor is going to get the call. I said it all the time. The guy that is diving on that floor to get a loose ball, again, these are human beings. They remember that effort. They remember that hard work, and they are going to get rewarded more times than not. That's just how it is. So that was kind of my gripe. It's very, back to what you said at the beginning is these officials have kind of let some things go. It's been a very physical ACC play, but when you get these adjustments and you get this crew that all of a sudden kind of changes it up mid-game, it is very hard for a player to adjust. And I feel like Carolina just stayed aggressive and just didn't care, was continuing to attack, and it affected State.
I love that your NC State fandom is now complete. You mentioned the Chris Paul nut punch game, Julius Hodge. So you were obviously not aware of that back in Marion, Indiana. I'm going to go out on a limb. You're part of and NC State fans have long memories. Okay, it's part of the problem. So it can't just be the one game in Chapel Hill where there's a fairly large free throw discrepancy. It's a 30, 40 year body of work that NC State fans judge. I am genuinely curious though. 2012. There's the incident between Chris Corciani and Tom Gugliana and Carl Hess, who at the time is considered one of the best officials in the ACC. If you're not familiar with the story, which you probably should be by now, but has decided to throw Corch and Googs out of PNC Arena. You guys are playing Florida State. Florida State ends up beating you by a bunch. Neither here nor there. Carl is then not assigned to any more of your games. It's almost like 2 years goes by before he gets assigned to another game. He also was unofficially not invited to officiate at the ACC tournament that year. So a group of officials decide in the very first game to come out with, on their sneakers, the initials KH as if he was dead on their sneakers as some sort of tribute and or protest. Now, we can all agree that was not appropriate, but as a player in that tournament, what was your reaction to seeing the officials and their unofficial protest with Carl's initials on their shoes?
It's tough because, and especially because it's almost a direct shot at us in a way, because we were involved with it. But also just kind of looking at it from the perspective is those officiating groups are teams in a roundabout way. They all know each other. They know each other on a personal level. They work a lot of games together. So can I say I'm surprised? No. But it is tough going into a game knowing that these officials are so close and that they're willing to put a logo or, piece of tape on their shoe or chest or whatever it may be. And I was highly involved in what took place. So it's hard to, step into a game and be like, okay, they're not coming for us this game.
And by the way, you had a semifinal game that was determined, and you're gonna maybe disagree because you just said it wasn't one call, but that game, in my opinion, your game against Carolina was determined by the 50-50 call, Alex Johnson, Kendall Marshall. You can't convince me otherwise.
Yeah, I mean it's just hard, but but we could probably we can go back in that game and say, all right, there's a couple calls here that could have maybe went one way, and a couple calls here that could have went one way. So again, the hard part with sports in general is it all comes down to one play, and it's usually at the end of the game, and it's usually the one everybody's going to remember. But there were probably a ton of calls throughout that game that nobody remembers that were probably in question as well.
Not sure how many of those you got, but
that's just
Brian Dorsey. Woo! That was.
It was to this day. I think it was a charge. But
can you repeat anything that Mark said to Brian Dorsey during the second half of that game?
I mean, not without bleeping a lot of it out.
Yeah, I don't have that technology right now, but unreal. This is Pack Therapy. Scott Wood, Wolfpack Great, joining us. You can catch all of our episodes. Apple, Spotify, the Googles, you name it, we're there. Check out our YouTube page, 99.9 The Fan on YouTube. And also you can watch us on WRALSportsFan.com. When we come back, we will be talking about Wake Forest. And we'll be talking about where NC State goes from that loss to North Carolina and Chapel Hill and how they recover and their first step on Tuesday, which was beating Notre Dame. We'll do that next. So from one part of the Big Four, the loss in Chapel Hill, to the another stop in the Big Four, NC State goes down to Winston-Salem, where it hasn't always been friendly for the Wolfpack. They take on Wake Forest on Saturday. The Deacs are a very similar team to NC State this season. They're coming off of back-to-back losses to Virginia at home, which was difficult. That was one of those Q1 chances that they needed. And then they went to Pittsburgh Wednesday night. They ended up losing by a bucket. They rallied in the second half of that game. I don't know about you, Scott, but I'm always super impressed with Steve Forbes and with what they run and how hard he gets his teams to play. But the Deacs are 14-7, 6-4 in the league. They do have a win outside of the league over Wisconsin. In the league, they're the only team with a win over Clemson right now. They also have wins over Duke and Virginia Tech. So similar teams. I do believe there's room in the NCAA tournament for both NC State and Wake Forest. But if I'm NC State, I do not want to fool around and find out what happens if I get swept by Wake Forest this year. This may not be the game that they win, but I do think this is a good matchup for the Wolfpack and their guards. I think State's just got better guards than Wake Forest does.
Well, and I think they guard well. I think that's a big piece is that we've got two guards that can really guard. And if that's where there's another team's strength is, we can counter that pretty well. But again, I think everything matters, man. There's still quite a bit of season left. What is it? 9 games? I think it's 9 games left.
Ten more in the 10 more in the league for state. Yeah.
Okay, so 10 more games. So you got to keep getting them. You can't take any of these for granted. You're going to have to ignore the demon deacon pulling up the Harley and revving in your face before the game, which is just a great memory of mine. I love exhaust, but I always had good luck at Wake. I feel like outside of maybe my freshman year, I had a bad memory there, but I've always gone there and played well. I feel like this state team has gone on the road and played well. Virginia Tech was a scary game. Going to Virginia Tech, and we were able to handle business except for the last few minutes. So I expect them to do the same. I think again, like you said, very similar kind of styles, but I do feel like what's going to pull us through is our guard play. I just feel like they defend on another level, and that's going to separate us from them.
Yeah, I would imagine Casey Marcel will spend a lot of time on Appleby. I know Joyner is perfectly capable. Appleby really the player that makes Wake go. Let's talk a little bit about Terquavion Smith. He has the fall at Carolina, misses the last 9 minutes of that game. Very scary. He did manage to avoid any serious injury. I think the medical staff there took extra precaution because he had some numbness in his neck. So no issues there. I thought they did a great job taking care of him. And I thought it was a really good break for State that he wasn't hurt. Because quite frankly, Scott, I would tell you that the season was over, and I'm not sure how I could do 10 more weeks of pack therapy talking about a team that would have nowhere to go without Terquavion Smith. I think he's that important to this team.
Yeah. No, again, I mean, it was a scary moment. I think everybody watching the game was highly, highly worried, not only for the season, but for him. A guy that, made a big sacrifice to come to the university that he genuinely wants to play at, and he wants to find success here when he could have very easily, been a, first round pick last year. So, if anything, it was just scary for him as an individual that could go pro next year, come back, or whatever he wants to do. But he loves the school, so you just wanted to see him bounce back and not have a serious injury, which we were lucky to do. I think the first half, I think you could tell a little bit that he was, he was still attacking and playing the same way he does, but you could just tell whether it was, not having a couple of days of practice and a couple of those off days to heal up, kind of had an effect on him. But then the second half, he came out, and I think he made 2 or 3 in a row to start the second half, and it looked like the old Terquavion. But like anything, man, it's a dangerous sport, man. 2 guys going, I would never know what it's like to be that high. But I think even the last game, you saw him go up for a layup, and it's just you're just kind of watching. It's just like, how does that kid off technically what's his off foot, jumping off his right foot, going up with his left hand, get that high? I mean, he was probably a foot and a half above the rim, still came down, but he's a warrior and is able to bounce back, and that's the main thing that's going to help them go, is because he's a glue guy. You see it when he's on the bench. He's out there coaching. So I'm just glad that he's healthy and he's back out there with his teammates.
He struggled from the floor against Notre Dame. 0 for 5 on his 2s, 2 for 9 on his 3s. So he's 2 for 14, but he did make 11 of his 13 free throws. I really thought Jarkel Joyner, other than being the leading scorer in that game, was the most important player in that game. I felt like, I thought State itself was kind of sluggish in the first half. Then it asserted itself and then just kind of stopped playing defense. I thought in the second half, Notre Dame just kind of refused to go away. Where they were making shots. And I mean, they shot the heck out of the basketball from 3. So that's always going to keep you in a game. But I thought Joyner, as he has been many times this year, just kind of like a steadying, all right, let's kind of calm down. Let's get into our stuff. Let's get a bucket. You can't put a price on that. 6-year guy, you just can't put a price on
that. And I mean, we could talk about him every time we come on here. I mean, he's an absolute pleasure as a person, first and foremost, but he's a great leader, great player. I would almost say it's MVP 1 and MVP 2 with him and Terquavion. I mean, he makes the team go. He understands when we need to slow down, when we need to push. very rarely makes mistakes. I mean, he went a few games without even committing a turnover for a while, so he takes care of the ball. I'm sure if we had Kevin on here, he'd still be cussing about him missing that dunk. But hey, it happens sometimes. But I mean, he's just that floor general that every team needs, and State has one. And I wish he had a couple more years to play, dude. Honestly, because he's a lot of fun. To me, he almost reminds me. Oh gosh, now I'm drawing a blank on his name. The kid that came in from Alabama, Trevor. He reminds me of Trevor.
Yeah.
I was able to play with Trevor in the TBT. Very similar styles, just in control. You know, if he needs to get a bucket, he can get a bucket. But he also knows who to get the ball to and when to get the ball to him. And that's kind of things that go overlooked sometimes, is just that basketball IQ that he has and the experience that he has playing the game.
Your career last 2 years at NC State, you make the tournament in 12, you make the tournament in 13. 13, the selection show, both of those years was a adventure for you both times. When you're in this stretch, though, with 10 games to go, and they didn't have the quad system back then, the net wasn't introduced yet, but you knew, and Mark was an expert. Mark Godfrey was an expert in how to get into the tournament and what got you into that, what got the attention of the selection committee. So I'm curious, as a player in the down the stretch, and maybe you look at the Wake Forest game. Okay, this team's like us. Then you know they just played Notre Dame, who's not having a great year. And then they got Florida State coming up, who I would be scared as hell of because they're just athletic as all get out, but their number is terrible. So it's almost like you have these appendix games where it has no value, but if it bursts on you, it could kill you. I'm curious, as a player, how do you look at some of these games that they have coming up, because the ACC has never had teams. Thankfully, NC State doesn't play Louisville anymore, but they're just an albatross on the league right now as they try to put teams into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, as a player, I mean, I don't think you're thinking about it too much. I know, obviously, it's something that's in the back of the staff's mind, which is how the net and everything is now. But as a player, you're trying to get every single one of them. And you also know in the back of your mind as a player, you cannot take a day off. You know, every game is going to be a grind. Everybody's coming for you, and especially with the way the schedule is. Like I said it from the beginning, Florida State started out terrible, but Florida State towards the end of the year is going to be one of the better teams in the ACC. They're going to figure it out. So it is. It's a scary moment because, again, we've had a great season leading up to this point. But like I said, 10 games is a lot of games. You know, you go 4-6 down the stretch. You go 3-7 down the stretch, but you could also go 7-3. So, you know, this season can still go many different ways. But I like the leadership of this team. I like where their head's at, and I think they're going to continue to understand that there is an emphasis on every game. No games off. We got to come ready to play, and we got to put our best foot forward at all times. You know, there might be a couple games where we don't shoot well. It happens, but we got to find ways to win. And I think, you know, with Jarkel and T and the staff put in place, I think they have an understanding of that and the emphasis on, you know, we got to go one game at a time, and it starts with Wake.
Before we go and wrap up this week, Mike Bray retiring or leaving Notre Dame at the end of the year. You grew up in Indiana. I know the Monty Tao story. I know you were recruited early by NC State, but and we've talked a little bit about your understanding of Indiana basketball. We've talked a little bit about, shockingly, as a white shooter, you had interest in Duke growing up. But where was Indiana? Where was Notre Dame on your radar? Because Bray, to me, is like the coolest guy in the room.
No, I mean, I absolutely love my visit there. I love.
You did visit there.
Yes,
All right.
I absolutely love Coach Bray. Absolutely laid back. Cool as the other side of the pillow, whatever you want to call it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was able to play pickup with the team while I was there. So just getting a good feel of it. Campus is, I mean, about as historical as you can get. You know, it's a sad thing for them because I can honestly say, even being an Indiana guy, I couldn't tell you who the coach was before Mike Bray. You know, I honestly, I don't know if I could tell you a coach that was there other than a football coach. I can name more football coaches. You can name one?
No. I'm laughing because Carolina fans want to forget that he ever existed, and they never mention him. But actually,
Well,
the coach before Mike Bray was Matt Doherty. He was there for 1 year, and when Roy had turned Carolina down, they kind of went down the family tree, and Matt Doherty had left Notre Dame after 1 year and then went to Carolina and was summarily fired 3 years later. So it's interesting to me that you say that because, of course, like I said, State fans have a long memory of how this all works, and obviously having covered it for 25 years, I remember certain things too.
Well, I couldn't tell you any, but I did. I enjoyed it. To this day, I tell everybody if I would have transferred from State after my sophomore year, I would have probably went to Notre Dame. I mean, Notre Dame was easily in my top 5 coming out of recruitment. Probably in the State, it was them and Butler, the two that I was probably looking at the most.
Yeah, you could have been, but you couldn't have coexisted with Gordon Hayward, can you?
No, he beat me in the
because you haven't forgiven him yet.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, well, but I'm glad he made a lot of money, but I want that one back pretty bad. So
that was your junior year or your senior year?
My junior year. Yeah.
Junior year, state championship, Indiana. Now they had gotten rid of the open tournament. At that point, it was a classification, right?
Yeah, we could talk about officiating there.
Oh yeah.
There's one. I make a 3, 2.1 seconds. They call timeout when the ball goes through the basket.
Okay.
The ball should be baseline.
Yeah.
So in real time, they took the ball out, passed it to about where the free throw line was. But if the clock stopped and the timeout was called there, it should be like 0.9. But
sure, there should be time off of the clock. Yeah.
They gave them the 2.1 when the ball went through
at the
sideline, and they scored with 2.1 seconds to beat us. So you want to talk about bad officiating?
He hit a shot at the buzzer. It was a little bit of a circuit shot, wasn't it?
Yeah, a little bit of like an underhand scoop shot. We tipped it, actually. Jay Edwards, a very famous name in Indiana basketball. His son tipped it. Hayward picked it up, kind of did a scoop shot about from the free throw line and went in to beat us 2.1 seconds. So to this day, even when I was at State, anything with 2.1, I'm like, hey, let's play defense. I've got bad memories of this. And you'd be surprised how many times I've had a game at the end, 2.1 seconds left. It haunts me.
You might have been something with Brad Stevens. I'm not going to lie to you.
You never know.
I'm not going to lie to you, man.
he was a good man. And they when I was at State, they were really good, especially my first couple of years, man. But again, it's just
10. They're in the title game. 11. They go back to the Final Four.
Yeah, I always wanted to play in ACC though. I would never regret my decision looking back on it.
No regrets here. No regrets. You wouldn't be here with me today at Pack Therapy.
I got the tattoo. We're the Millers.
That's right.
Movie quote for today. No regrets.
No regrets.
Not a single letter.
Nope, you wouldn't be here with me. So check us out every week. We'll have coverage for the Wake Forest game, of course. We'll talk again next week. Scott Wood, if you missed anything, check us out on WRALSportsFan.com. Check us out on our YouTube page. You can watch the complete episodes on the 99.9 The Fan YouTube page. And, of course, download Apple, Spotify, the Googles, you name it. We'll see you next week right here on Pack Therapy.